The gunshot that killed her husband echoed in Willa Zimmerman's mind as she ran through the darkness with her 3-month-old son pressed against her chest, his tiny whimpers muffled by the threadbare shawl wrapped around them both. September 1879 had brought an early frost to Kansas, and the cold air burned her lungs as she stumbled along the rutted road leading away from Leavenworth, away from the grand house where she had been trapped for 2 nightmarish years, away from the family that had shown their true nature the moment her husband's body hit the floor. She had seen the calculation in her father-in-law's eyes, the way he had looked at baby Samuel as though he were property to be claimed, and she knew with absolute certainty that they would never let her leave with her son. They would take him, raise him as their own, and she would be cast out as an inconvenient widow or worse, silenced permanently like they had silenced others who knew too much about their dealings. Her feet ached in the thin leather shoes that were meant for parlor floors, not the packed earth of a country road in the middle of the night. Blood seeped through the torn fabric where stones had cut her, but she could not stop. Behind her, she heard the distant sound of horses, and terror gave her exhausted body new strength. The Zimmerman family owned half of Leavenworth, controlled the sheriff, the judge, and most of the merchants. Her father-in-law, Victor Zimmerman, had built his fortune through means that would never hold up to honest scrutiny, and he ruled his empire with an iron fist that brooked no defiance. When his son Marcus had courted her 2 years ago, Willa had been a naive 17-year-old girl, dazzled by the wealth and attention, blind to the cruelty that lurked beneath the polished surface. The truth had revealed itself slowly, painfully. The way Marcus would fly into rages over nothing, the bruises she learned to hide, the servants who disappeared without explanation. But she had endured it all because leaving had seemed impossible. Then Samuel had been born, and she had felt a love so fierce and protective that it changed everything. When she had overheard Victor and his eldest son Nathaniel discussing Marcus's unfortunate accident, the way they had arranged for him to take a fatal fall down the stairs because his drinking and erratic behavior had become a liability to the family reputation, she had known her time was running out. They had killed their own blood without hesitation. What chance did she have? The road curved ahead, and Willa nearly sobbed with relief when she saw the dim light of a building in the distance. As she drew closer, she made out the shape of a large barn and a modest ranch house. Horses moved in a nearby corral, their dark shapes barely visible in the starlight. She had no idea who lived here, but she had no choice. Samuel was crying harder now, cold and hungry, and she could hear the riders getting closer. They would have lanterns soon, would be able to track her. She stumbled into the yard and nearly fell against the barn door. Her hands shook so badly she could barely lift the heavy wooden latch, but desperation gave her strength. The door swung open with a groan of hinges, and she slipped inside, pulling it closed behind her. The interior was warm and smelled of hay and horses. She could make out several stalls and in the far corner what looked like a tack room. She hurried toward it, her breath coming in gasping sobs. The tack room had a door, and she shut herself inside, sinking down onto the floor in the corner farthest from the entrance. Samuel was wailing now, and she fumbled with her bodice, trying to nurse him quiet. Her hands were shaking so hard it took 3 tries, but finally he latched on, and the barn fell silent except for the soft sounds of the horses shifting in their stalls. She must have dozed off from sheer exhaustion because the next thing she knew, lamplight was flooding the small room and a man's voice said, "Well, I'll be damned." Willa jerked awake, instinctively clutching Samuel closer. Her heart hammered as she looked up at the figure in the doorway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing worn denim pants and a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and even in her terror, she registered that he was young, probably not much older than her own 19 years. His face was sunburned and angular, with dark eyes that were currently wide with surprise. "Please," she gasped out, "please do not tell anyone I am here. They are looking for me. They will kill me." The man's expression shifted from surprise to concern. He held up one hand in a calming gesture, the lantern steady in his other hand. "Hold on now, just hold on. Nobody is going to hurt you. What are you talking about? Who is looking for you?" "The Zimmermans," she whispered, and she saw recognition flash across his face. Everyone in this part of Kansas knew the Zimmerman name. "I am Marcus Zimmerman's widow, and they want to take my baby. Please, I know I have no right to ask, but please do not tell them I am here." The man was quiet for a long moment, studying her. She knew what he must see: a desperate woman with wild eyes, dirt-stained clothes, and a baby clutched to her chest. She probably looked insane. Then he set the lantern down carefully and crouched so he was at her eye level, keeping his distance as though approaching a frightened animal. "My name is Thomas Brennan," he said quietly. "This is my ranch about 5 miles outside of Leavenworth. I heard the horses going past on the road about 20 minutes ago, heading east. They were moving fast." He paused, seeming to measure his next words carefully. "I also heard in town yesterday that Marcus Zimmerman died, fell down the stairs at the family house. I am sorry for your loss." The formal condolence sounded strange given the circumstances, and Willa felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her throat. "I am not," she said flatly. "Marcus was not a good man, and his family is worse. They killed him because he was becoming an embarrassment, and now they want to take Samuel and dispose of me. I heard them planning it." Thomas's jaw tightened. "That is a serious accusation." "I know what I heard." Her voice cracked. "Please, I am not asking you to involve yourself. Just let me rest here for a few hours and I will be gone by dawn. They will not think to search here. You can say you never saw me." He was quiet again, his dark eyes thoughtful. Finally, he stood and held out his hand. "Come on. You cannot stay in the barn. If they do come searching, that is the first place they will look, and that baby needs to be somewhere warm." Willa stared at his outstretched hand, afraid to trust, afraid not to. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." "Because I do know the Zimmermans," Thomas said, and there was something hard in his voice. "My father used to own the ranch next to this one, twice the size. Victor Zimmerman wanted the land, made him an offer. When my father refused to sell, strange things started happening. Fences cut, cattle rustled, the barn burned down one night. My father died trying to save the horses." He paused, his expression carefully controlled. "That was 4 years ago. The sheriff ruled it an accident. Victor Zimmerman bought that land from my mother for a fraction of what it was worth, because we had no money left to rebuild, no way to fight him. So yes, I believe you when you say they are dangerous." Willa felt tears spring to her eyes. She took his hand and let him help her to her feet. Samuel stirred against her chest but did not wake. Thomas picked up the lantern and led her out of the barn, across the dark yard to the ranch house. It was a simple structure, well maintained but modest. He opened the door and ushered her inside. The interior was neat and spare, clearly the home of a man living alone. There was a kitchen area with a wood stove, a table and 2 chairs, and a sitting area with a worn sofa and a bookshelf. 2 doors led off to what she assumed were bedrooms. "You can take my room," Thomas said, leading her to one of the doors. "I will sleep on the sofa." "I cannot take your bed," Willa protested weakly. "You can and you will. You look like you are about to fall over." He pushed open the door to reveal a small, simple bedroom with a single bed covered in a patchwork quilt. There is water in the pitcher if you need to wash up. I will bring you something to eat." He left before she could argue further, closing the door gently behind him. Willa stood in the middle of the room, swaying slightly, feeling as though she had stepped into a dream. This stranger was helping her, offering her shelter, and she did not even fully understand why. She knew she should not trust so easily, but exhaustion and desperation had stripped away her ability to be cautious. She laid Samuel on the bed, making a nest of the quilt around him so he could not roll. Though at 3 months, he was not yet mobile enough for that to be a real concern. Then she poured water from the pitcher into the basin on the dresser and washed her face and hands. The water turned brown with dirt, and she could see scratches across her palms that she did not remember getting. Her feet were worse when she peeled off her ruined shoes, bloody and blistered. A soft knock on the door made her jump. "I have some food," Thomas called. "Come in," she said, too tired to care about propriety. He entered carrying a plate with bread, cheese, and cold chicken. "It is not much. I was not expecting company." "It looks like a feast," Willa said honestly, taking the plate with shaking hands. She sat on the edge of the bed and ate ravenously, barely tasting the food. Thomas stood awkwardly near the door, watching her. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday morning, I think." The timeline was blurry in her mind. "I have been planning this for 3 days, ever since I overheard them. I had to wait until I knew where they would all be, wait for the right moment." "You walked from town in the dark with a baby," Thomas said, and it was not quite a question. "I ran most of it." She finished the last of the bread and set the plate aside. "I did not know where I was going, I just knew I had to get away." "Where will you go?" The question was gentle, but it hit her like a blow. "I do not know," she admitted. "I have no family. My parents died of cholera when I was 16. That is how I ended up married to Marcus. The family who had taken me in could not afford to keep me, and when he offered marriage, it seemed like an answer to prayer." She laughed bitterly. "I was such a fool. You were young and alone." "That does not make you a fool." Thomas leaned against the door frame. "Look, I know you said you would leave by dawn, but I think you should stay here at least for a few days. Let them search the area, give up, move on. You are in no condition to travel far, and neither is the baby." "I cannot put you in danger," Willa said, even though every fiber of her being wanted to accept his offer. "If they find out you helped me, they will destroy you the way they destroyed your father." "They will never find you here," Thomas said firmly. "This ranch is off the main road, and I do not get many visitors. The few ranch hands I employ live in town and only come out a few days a week. If anyone asks, I will say I have not seen you. The Zimmermans have no reason to search my property specifically." "But why would you risk it?" she asked, searching his face. "You do not owe me anything." He was quiet for a moment, his expression difficult to read. "Let me just say I know what it is like to feel powerless against people like that. If I can help you, maybe it balances the scales a little bit." He straightened. "Get some rest. We can talk more in the morning." He left, closing the door behind him, and Willa sat in the silent room, listening to Samuel's soft breathing. She should not stay. It was wrong to endanger this man who had already suffered because of the Zimmermans. But where else could she go? She had no money, no resources, nowhere to run. And Thomas was right that she was in no condition to travel. Her body ached everywhere, and Samuel needed stability, warmth, and regular feeding. She changed Samuel's diaper using one of the few clean cloths she had stuffed into her pockets before fleeing, then laid him back on the bed. She stretched out beside him, fully clothed, and pulled the quilt over both of them. The bed was comfortable, the room warm, and within minutes, she had fallen into an exhausted sleep. She woke to daylight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, her heart pounding. Samuel was still asleep beside her, his little face peaceful. She could hear movement in the other room. Willa stood carefully, wincing as her feet protested. She was still wearing her filthy dress from yesterday, and she felt grimy and disheveled. But there was nothing to be done about it. She picked up Samuel and opened the bedroom door. Thomas was at the stove, frying eggs in a cast-iron skillet. He looked up when she emerged and offered a small smile. "Good morning. I hope the baby let you sleep." He did, surprisingly. Willa moved into the room cautiously. In the daylight, she could see Thomas more clearly. He was probably 21 or 22, with an open, honest face that was sunburned from outdoor work. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who worked hard for a living. He was wearing clean clothes, and his dark hair was still damp, as though he had washed recently. "I made breakfast," he said, gesturing to the table, which was set for two. "Have a seat." Willa sat, settling Samuel in her lap. Thomas brought over the skillet and served eggs onto both plates, then added bacon and biscuits. It was more food than she had seen in days, and her stomach growled audibly. "Eat," Thomas said, sitting down across from her. "You need to keep your strength up if you are nursing." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Willa felt strange sitting here in this man's kitchen, sharing a meal as though they were old friends instead of strangers brought together by desperate circumstances. Samuel began to fuss, and she shifted him so she could eat one-handed while bouncing him gently. "How old is he?" Thomas asked. 3 months. He was born in June." She looked down at her son's small face, feeling the familiar fierce rush of love and protectiveness. "He is the only good thing that came from my marriage." "What was it like?" Thomas asked, then quickly added, "You do not have to talk about it if you do not want to." But Willa found she did want to talk about it. She had spent 2 years trapped in silence, unable to tell anyone the truth. "Marcus was charming when he was courting me," she said slowly. "He brought me flowers, took me to dinner, told me I was beautiful. I thought I was so lucky. The wealthiest family in Leavenworth, and their son wanted to marry me, a poor orphan with nothing to her name." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "The mask came off about a week after the wedding. He had a terrible temper, especially when he drank, which was often. He would break things, scream at the servants, and sometimes he would hit me." She said it matter-of-factly, but her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "His family knew. They saw the bruises, heard the fights, but they did not care. To them, I was just a possession, something Marcus owned. The only time Victor Zimmerman spoke to me directly was to tell me I should be grateful for the life they had given me, and that I should do a better job of keeping Marcus happy." Thomas's jaw was tight, his knuckles white where he gripped his fork. "I am sorry. No one should have to live like that. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought maybe it would get better. Maybe having a child would change Marcus, make him want to be a better man." She laughed without humor. "Instead, it made him worse. He resented Samuel, said the baby was too loud, too demanding, took too much of my attention. The night before he died, he had been drinking heavily. He came into the nursery where I was feeding Samuel and started yelling. He grabbed the baby out of my arms, and I truly thought he was going to hurt him. I begged him to give Samuel back, and he just laughed and held him higher, dangling him in the air while Samuel screamed." Her voice broke, and she had to stop for a moment to compose herself. Thomas waited patiently, his expression sympathetic. Marcus finally gave him back and stormed out. The next day I heard the commotion, heard Victor shouting. I came out of my room and saw Marcus at the bottom of the stairs. His neck was broken. Everyone was saying it was an accident, that he had been drunk and fallen. But that night, I heard Victor and Nathaniel in Victor's study. I was walking past, and heard Nathaniel say something about how unfortunate accidents happen to people who become liabilities. Victor agreed and said it was a shame, but Marcus had left them no choice. Then Victor said that at least the boy would be raised properly now, without a weak-willed mother to coddle him. They planned to take Samuel, Thomas said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Yes, and I knew I could not let that happen. I could not let them raise my son to be like them, cruel and ruthless and without conscience, so I took what little I could carry and ran. She looked directly at Thomas. I know how it sounds. I know people will say I am lying, that I am a hysterical widow making wild accusations. The Zimmermans are powerful and respected. Who am I compared to them? You are a mother protecting her child, Thomas said firmly, and for what it is worth, I believe you. I know what they are capable of. The sincerity in his voice made Willa's eyes sting with tears. Thank you, she whispered. You cannot know what it means to be believed. Samuel chose that moment to start crying in earnest, and Willa excused herself to the bedroom to nurse him. When she returned, Thomas had cleared the breakfast dishes and was pouring coffee into 2 mugs. I have been thinking, he said, handing her one of the mugs. If you are going to stay here for a few days, we need to make sure there is no trace of you if anyone comes looking. That dress you are wearing is pretty distinctive. I think we should burn it. Willa looked down at the once fine blue silk gown, now torn and stained beyond repair. I do not have anything else to wear. I did not exactly have time to pack a trunk. My mother left some clothes when she moved back east to live with her sister. They are probably a bit old-fashioned now, but they are clean and serviceable. I kept them thinking I might sell them, but I never got around to it. You are welcome to them. I could not, Willa protested automatically. You can and you will, Thomas said, echoing his words from the night before. Wait here. He disappeared into the second bedroom and emerged a few minutes later carrying an armful of folded garments. There are a few dresses, some under things, and I think there is a warm coat in there too. My mother was about your height, maybe a bit heavier, but you can take them in if you need to. Willa set down her coffee and took the clothes, feeling the weight of them in her arms. They smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. I will repay you for all of this somehow, she said. I promise. You do not owe me anything. Just focus on taking care of yourself and the baby. Thomas picked up his hat from a peg by the door. I have some work to do around the ranch. I will be within shouting distance if you need anything. Make yourself at home. He left, and Willa stood in the quiet house, feeling overwhelmed. In the space of a single night, she had gone from thinking she and Samuel would die on that dark road to being safe and warm and fed. It felt almost too good to be true, and part of her kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. But as the morning wore on and nothing terrible happened, she began to relax slightly. She washed her ruined dress as best she could and hung it to dry, knowing she would burn it later as Thomas had suggested. She changed into one of the dresses from his mother's collection, a simple brown calico that fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in the waist. It felt strange to wear another woman's clothes, but it also felt like stepping into a new identity, leaving Willa Zimmerman behind and becoming someone else. She spent the afternoon exploring the house, taking stock of what was there. The kitchen was well stocked with basics: flour, beans, salt pork, coffee. There were preserves on a shelf that looked homemade, probably put up by Thomas himself. The sitting room had a surprising number of books on the shelf, and she ran her fingers over the spines, reading the titles. Shakespeare, Dickens, Melville, and several books on animal husbandry and ranching. It painted a picture of a man who was both practical and educated, someone who valued both physical work and intellectual pursuits. She was nursing Samuel in the rocking chair by the window when Thomas returned near sunset. He stomped his boots on the porch before entering, and she appreciated the small courtesy. "How was your day?" he asked, washing his hands at the sink. "Quiet, peaceful." She realized as she said it that she could not remember the last time she had experienced a peaceful day. "How was yours?" "I mended about 2 miles of fence line and checked on the cattle. Everything looks good. We have been lucky with the weather this fall." He dried his hands on a towel and turned to face her. "I wanted to talk to you about something. I rode out to the main road earlier just to see if there was any sign of activity. There were fresh tracks heading east and then back west again. They were searching, like you said. But I do not think they will be back. This area is mostly small ranches and farmland. If they did not find you on the first search, they will assume you made it farther than you did." "So I am safe," Willa hardly dared to hope. "I think so, at least for now." "But Willa, you need to think about the long term. You cannot hide here forever. Eventually, you are going to need a plan." "I know." She looked down at Samuel, who had fallen asleep at her breast. "I have been thinking about it. I have a cousin in Colorado, in Denver. We were close as children before my parents died. I could write to her, see if she would take us in." "That could work," Thomas said thoughtfully. "But it will take time for letters to go back and forth, and you will need money for train fare. Do you have any?" "No. I left with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and a few diapers for Samuel." Shame heated her cheeks. "I am completely dependent on your charity, and I hate it. I am not someone who takes without giving back." "Then do not think of it as charity. Think of it as a temporary arrangement. You can help around the house, cooking and cleaning, and I can pay you a wage. That way you will have some money saved when it is time to leave." Willa stared at him. "You would pay me to do housework in a house where I am already living as a guest." "It is not charity if you work for it," Thomas pointed out. "And to be honest, having someone to do the cooking would be a huge help. I am a terrible cook. I can make the basics, but I am tired of eating half-burned eggs and biscuits that could double as bricks." Despite everything, Willa found herself laughing. "All right," she agreed. "I can do that. I am actually a decent cook. Marcus's mother insisted I learn proper household management even though they had servants to do everything. I think she enjoyed making me take lessons in things I would never actually do. Well, her loss is my gain, I suppose." Thomas smiled, and Willa noticed for the first time that he had a dimple in his left cheek. "Should we shake on it, make it official?" She shifted Samuel to one arm and extended her hand. Thomas's hand was warm and calloused as it closed around hers, and she felt a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or exhaustion. She pushed the feeling aside. She had no business feeling anything for any man, especially not one who was being kind to her out of decency. She was damaged goods, a widow with a baby and a dangerous family hunting her. The last thing Thomas Brennan needed was for her to develop some kind of inappropriate attachment. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a routine. Willa woke early to make breakfast, surprised and pleased to find that she enjoyed the simple task of cooking for someone who appreciated the results. Thomas was effusive in his praise of even the most basic meals, and she suspected he had not been exaggerating about his own culinary deficiencies. She cleaned the house, did laundry, and tended to Samuel, who was growing bigger and more alert every day. In the afternoons, while the baby napped, she would often sit on the porch and watch Thomas work with the horses in the corral. He had a gentle way with the animals, patient and firm, and she found herself drawn to watching him, though she told herself it was simply because there was little else to do. Thomas, for his part, seemed to enjoy having company. In the evenings after dinner, they would sit by the fire and talk. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father's dreams of building a legacy, about the devastation of losing everything to Victor Zimmerman's greed. She told him about her childhood, about her parents who had loved her fiercely in the brief time she had with them, about her dreams of becoming a teacher before circumstances had forced her into a hasty marriage. "It is not too late, you know," Thomas said one evening as they sat across from each other at the kitchen table, a lamp burning between them. "You could still be a teacher once you get settled in Denver." "Maybe," Willa said, though she had trouble imagining a future that did not involve looking over her shoulder, waiting for the Zimmermans to find her. "I would need training, and I have Samuel to think about now. Everything is more complicated with a baby. Complicated, but not impossible." Thomas leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. "You are stronger than you give yourself credit for. You left an impossible situation with nothing but courage and a prayer. That takes real strength." "I was terrified," Willa admitted. "I am still terrified. Every time I hear a horse on the road, I think it is them coming for us. They have not come back. It has been 3 weeks, Willa. I think you are safe." She wanted to believe him, but fear was a hard habit to break. Still, she had to admit that life had taken on a surprising sweetness in these weeks. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. She went to sleep without dreading what the next day would bring and woke without the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Samuel was thriving, growing plumper and more responsive. And Thomas was, she hardly knew how to describe what he was becoming to her. It was not romantic, she told herself firmly. She was grateful to him, that was all. He had saved her life and Samuel's life, had given them shelter and safety when they had nowhere else to go. It was natural that she would feel fondness for him. The fact that her heart beat a little faster when he came through the door at the end of the day, that she found herself watching his hands as he worked, that she had started paying more attention to her appearance in the mornings, none of that meant anything. She was just regaining her sense of self after years of being beaten down. That was all. But one evening in late October, as they sat by the fire after dinner, something shifted. Thomas had brought in extra wood and was stacking it by the hearth. The firelight played across his features, softening them, and when he looked up and caught her watching him, he did not look away. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, and Willa felt the air between them change, become charged with something she was not quite ready to name. "Willa," Thomas said, and his voice was different, lower, more intimate. He crossed the space between them and knelt beside her chair. "I need to tell you something, and I am not sure how you will take it." Her heart hammered in her chest. "What is it?" "These past few weeks, having you here, I have been happier than I have been in years. At first, I told myself I was just glad to have company, that it was nice to have someone to talk to and share meals with. But it is more than that." He took a breath. "I care about you, Willa. Not just as someone I am helping, but as someone I could see a future with. And I know this is probably the worst timing in the world. You are still dealing with so much, and the last thing you need is me complicating things further. But I could not keep pretending I feel nothing when I feel so much." Willa's throat was tight. "Thomas, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything right now. I just wanted you to know where I stand. I am not expecting anything from you. You are still welcome here for as long as you need, whether you share my feelings or not. I promise nothing has to change if you do not want it to." But Willa realized in that moment that everything had already changed, because hearing him say those words had unlocked something in her own heart that she had been trying desperately to ignore. "What if I do want things to change?" she whispered. "What if I have been feeling the same thing but was too afraid to admit it?" Thomas's eyes widened. "Then I would say that would make me the happiest man in Kansas. But it is too soon," Willa said, even as her heart argued otherwise. Marcus has been dead barely 2 months. People would talk. They would say terrible things. I do not care what people say. Do you? I care about you, Willa said fiercely. I care about your reputation, your standing in the community. Being associated with me could damage you. Willa, my standing in the community is that of a small rancher barely scraping by. I am not important enough for people to gossip about, and even if they did, it would not matter to me. The only thing that matters is whether you want this, whether you could see yourself feeling something real for me, not just gratitude. She reached out and touched his face, feeling the rasp of stubble beneath her palm. I do not think I could separate the two even if I wanted to. You saved my life, Thomas. You gave me and Samuel a home when we had nothing. How can I feel anything but grateful? Because gratitude is not the same as love, Thomas said quietly. And I do not want you to be with me because you feel obligated. I want you to be with me because you choose to be, because you want to build a life with me. The word love hung in the air between them, huge and terrifying and wonderful. Willa realized that Thomas had not said he loved her, not exactly, but it was implicit in everything he was saying. And the most amazing, frightening thing was that she thought she might love him too. How had it happened? How had this quiet, kind man worked his way so completely into her heart in such a short time? I do choose you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I do not know if it is too soon or if I am making another mistake, but I know that when I am with you I feel safe. I feel seen. You look at me like I am a person, not a possession or a problem. And yes, I am grateful, but it is more than that. You make me want to believe in second chances. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, they were bright with emotion. Can I kiss you? He asked. Yes, Willa breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning. She kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it, all the fear and hope and desperate yearning for something good and true and real. The kiss deepened, and she felt Thomas's arms come around her, pulling her close but careful, always careful, mindful of her boundaries. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. I will wait as long as you need, he said. I know you have been through hell, and I am not going to rush you into anything. We can take this as slow as you want. What if I do not want slow? Willa asked, surprising herself. What if I am tired of being afraid and want to grab onto happiness with both hands? Then I would say we should probably talk about what that looks like, Thomas said practically, though his eyes were warm, because there are some logistics to figure out. They talked late into the night, mapping out possibilities. Thomas proposed that they could get married quietly, just the two of them and a preacher, sometime in the next few weeks. Willa hesitated, not because she did not want to marry him, but because she was still legally in mourning and worried about the impropriety. But Thomas pointed out that propriety had not stopped the Zimmermans from trying to destroy her, and maybe it was time she stopped worrying about what people thought and started worrying about building a life for herself and Samuel. What about Denver? Willa asked. What about my cousin? Write to her, Thomas suggested. Tell her you are safe and have found somewhere to settle. That way she knows you are all right, but you do not have to uproot yourself again unless you want to. You would want us to stay here, permanently. I would want you to stay here as my wife if you will have me, Thomas said. This ranch is not much, but it is mine, and it could be yours too, ours. We could build something together, a real home, a real family. Willa thought about it, thought about the life he was offering. It was simple, nothing like the wealth and status she had briefly enjoyed as a Zimmerman, but it was honest and it was built on something real. Yes, she said finally. Yes, I will marry you. Thomas kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it. And for the first time since the night she ran, Willa allowed herself to feel something other than fear. She felt hope. They were married 2 weeks later in a small church in a town 20 miles from Leavenworth, far enough that they were unlikely to run into anyone who might recognize Willa. The preacher asked few questions, willing to accept Thomas's explanation that they wanted a quiet ceremony due to Willa's recent widowhood. She wore a simple blue dress that had belonged to Thomas's mother, and Thomas wore his best shirt and a string tie. Samuel slept through the entire ceremony, swaddled in a blanket. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Willa felt tears slip down her cheeks, but for once they were tears of joy. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, and Thomas carried her over the threshold in the traditional manner, making her laugh. That night, after they had put Samuel to bed in the small cradle Thomas had built, they came together as husband and wife with a tenderness that made Willa weep again. Thomas was patient and gentle, constantly checking to make sure she was all right, and when it was over, she lay in his arms feeling whole in a way she had not felt in years. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I know I have not said it before, but I do. I love you, Thomas." "I love you too," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you looked up at me with those terrified eyes and begged me to help you. I knew right then I would do anything to keep you safe. You did keep me safe. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Thomas corrected. "I was so lonely before you came, Willa. I did not realize how much I was just going through the motions until you and Samuel filled this house with life." They fell asleep tangled together, and Willa slept more deeply than she had in months, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and protected. The winter that followed was cold but beautiful. Kansas could be brutal in winter, with winds that howled across the prairie and temperatures that plunged below freezing. But inside the ranch house, there was warmth and light and laughter. Willa learned the rhythms of ranch life, helping Thomas with the daily chores when the weather permitted. She learned to churn butter, to preserve vegetables, to mend harnesses and clothing. Samuel grew rapidly, reaching for things, learning to roll over and developing a personality that was all his own. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, and Thomas doted on him as though he were his own son. One evening in January, as they sat by the fire after supper, Thomas cleared his throat. "I have been thinking about something," he said. "Samuel is going to need a proper last name. Right now, legally, he is Samuel Zimmerman, and I do not like that. I do not want him connected to that family in any way." "What are you proposing?" Willa asked, though she thought she knew. "I want to adopt him officially, make him Samuel Brennan. That way there is no legal tie back to the Zimmermans. He will be my son in every way that matters." Thomas looked at her anxiously. "If that is all right with you." "It is more than all right," Willa said, her throat tight with emotion. "It is everything, but are you sure? Taking on someone else's child is a big responsibility." "He is not someone else's child. He is our child," Thomas said firmly. "I have been his father since the day you arrived here. The legal part is just a formality." They made the trip to the county seat in February to file the adoption papers. The clerk asked few questions, accepting Thomas's explanation that he was adopting his wife's child from her first marriage. When the papers were signed and notarized, Willa felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Samuel was no longer a Zimmerman. He was a Brennan, truly and completely, and there was nothing Victor Zimmerman could do about it. As winter turned to spring, Willa began to feel settled in a way she had never experienced before. This was her home, these were her people, this was her life. She had not heard anything from or about the Zimmermans in months, and she was starting to believe that they had truly given up the search. Thomas thought they had probably written her off as dead, assumed she had perished somewhere between Leavenworth, and wherever she had been trying to go. It was a grim thought, but it meant they were safe. In April, Willa realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just the lingering effects of nursing Samuel, but when she missed a second month and began to feel the familiar nausea of early pregnancy, she knew. She was carrying Thomas's child. She told him one evening after Samuel had been put to bed. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Thomas, I have some news," she said, her heart pounding. He turned to look at her, concern flickering across his face. "What is it? Is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." Thomas's expression went through a series of rapid changes: shock, disbelief, wonder, joy. "You are certain?" he asked, his voice shaking. "As certain as I can be without a doctor, but I know the signs. I would guess I am about 2 months along." Thomas let out a whoop of joy that startled her and then pulled her into his arms, laughing. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, as though saying it out loud would make it more real. "Willa, I am going to be a father." "You already are a father," she reminded him gently. "Samuel is yours in every way that counts. I know, and I love him fiercely. But this is different. This is a child we created together, a symbol of our love." He cupped her face in his hands. "Thank you. Thank you for this gift, for this life, for everything." "Thank you for choosing me," Willa said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for loving me when I was broken." "You were never broken," Thomas said fiercely. "You were bent, maybe, by what you endured, but you were never broken. And now look at you, look at us. We are building something beautiful." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Willa bloomed with health. Samuel was walking now, toddling around the house and keeping her busy, but she loved every chaotic moment. Thomas hired an additional ranch hand to help with the work, knowing that Willa would need to take it easier as her pregnancy advanced. They talked about names, about where they would put another cradle, about what it would be like to have 2 children in the house. One afternoon in June, as Willa was hanging laundry in the yard, a rider approached on the road. She froze, old fears surging to the surface, but as the figure drew closer, she saw it was just the postal carrier, a man named Henry who made the rounds to the outlying ranches once a week. She relaxed and went to meet him. "Afternoon, Mrs. Brennan," Henry said, tipping his hat. "Got a letter here for you. Came all the way from Colorado." Willa took the envelope with shaking hands. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from her cousin Margaret, responding to the letter Willa had sent months ago. She thanked Henry and carried the letter inside, settling into the rocking chair to read it. Margaret's letter was warm and effusive. She was thrilled to hear that Willa was safe and well, and even more thrilled to learn of her marriage. She congratulated Willa on her new life, and assured her that she would always have a place in Denver if she ever needed it, but that it sounded like she had found where she belonged. The letter was full of news about Margaret's own life, her husband and 3 children, her work with the church, and the growing bustle of Denver as the city expanded. It was like receiving a piece of her past, a connection to the girl she had been before everything went wrong. Willa wrote back that same evening, telling Margaret about her pregnancy, about Samuel's adoption, about the ranch and the life she was building. It felt good to have this connection, to know that there was someone out there who knew her story and cared about her well-being. Summer passed in a blur of heat and growth. The crops Thomas had planted flourished, and the cattle fattened on the rich prairie grass. Willa's belly grew round and heavy, and Thomas fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest, that she not overdo it. She found his concern endearing, though sometimes suffocating. She was not made of glass and she enjoyed working, keeping busy. But she understood that his protectiveness came from love, and she tried to be patient with it. In late October, 2 weeks before her due date, Willa went into labor. It started in the early morning, a dull ache in her lower back that gradually intensified. Thomas rode into town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henley, who had delivered half the babies in the county. By the time they returned, Willa's contractions were coming strong and regular. The labor was long and difficult, harder than it had been with Samuel. Willa had forgotten how all-consuming it was, the pain that built and built until it seemed impossible to endure, and then broke like a wave, giving her a brief respite before the next one began. Thomas stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement. Mrs. Henley worked efficiently, checking Willa's progress, offering guidance and reassurance. Finally, after nearly 14 hours of labor, their son was born. He came out screaming, red-faced and furious, and Willa laughed and cried at the same time as Mrs. Henley placed him on her chest. Thomas was crying too, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son for the first time. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "He is absolutely perfect." "What should we call him?" Willa asked, though they had discussed names extensively. "I was thinking maybe we could name him after my father," Thomas said tentatively. "James." "James Brennan." "James," Willa repeated, testing the name. "I like it. James Thomas Brennan." "James Thomas," Thomas said and smiled. "That is a strong name, a good name, Mrs. Henley stayed for a few hours to make sure both mother and baby were doing well, then departed with promises to check in again in a few days. Thomas brought Samuel in to meet his new brother, and the toddler stared at the baby with wide, curious eyes. "Baba," he said, which was his word for baby, and Willa and Thomas laughed. That night, as Willa lay in bed with James nursing at her breast and Thomas asleep beside her, Samuel tucked into his small bed in the corner, she felt a sense of completeness that was almost overwhelming. This was her family. This was her home. She had traveled through hell to get here, but it had been worth it. Every moment of fear, every moment of pain had led her to this. The first year of James's life was exhausting but joyful. He was a demanding baby, colicky and fussy in a way Samuel had never been, but Willa loved him fiercely. Thomas was an attentive father, walking the floor with James when he could not sleep, changing diapers without complaint, and marveling over every small milestone. Samuel adjusted to being a big brother with surprising grace, and soon he was helping in his own toddler way, bringing diapers, singing to James when he cried. As James approached his first birthday, Willa realized with a start that it had been more than 2 years since she had fled the Zimmerman house in the middle of the night. 2 years, and not a word from them. She was starting to believe that she truly was free, that they had given her up for lost and moved on. The thought filled her with a relief so profound it was almost dizzying. One evening in early September, as they were finishing dinner, there was a knock at the door. It was unusual for anyone to come calling after dark, and Willa felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Thomas must have seen it on her face because he squeezed her hand reassuringly before going to answer it. The man on the porch was a stranger, dressed in a suit that was too fine for a rancher. He introduced himself as Mr. Edward Talbot, a lawyer from Leavenworth. Willa's blood ran cold. "I am sorry to disturb you at this hour," Talbot said, "but I have been searching for Mrs. Willa Zimmerman for quite some time. I was told she might be found here. This is Mrs. Willa Brennan," Thomas said firmly, his body language protective. "What is this about? May I come in? This is a rather delicate matter." Thomas looked back at Willa, and she nodded reluctantly, Better to know what they were facing than to send him away in ignorance. Thomas stepped aside and Talbot entered, removing his hat. His eyes swept the room, taking in the modest furnishings, the two children playing on a blanket near the fire and Willa sitting at the table, her expression guarded. "Mrs. Brennan," Talbot said, inclining his head. "Or should I say Mrs. Zimmerman? I understand you were married to Marcus Zimmerman until his death in September of 1879. "I was," Willa said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "But I am remarried now, and I have no ties to that family." "That is actually why I am here," Talbot said. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "I have been engaged by the estate of Victor Zimmerman to locate you and deliver this." "Victor Zimmerman is dead?" Thomas asked sharply. "He passed away 3 months ago of a heart seizure. His son Nathaniel died shortly after in a riding accident. The entire family, the entire male line, I should say, is now deceased. There are some female cousins, but they were not named in the will." Talbot held out the envelope to Willa. "Mr. Victor Zimmerman left specific instructions that if you were found, you were to receive this." Willa took the envelope with trembling hands. It was thick, expensive paper, sealed with wax bearing the Zimmerman crest. She broke the seal and pulled out the documents inside. The first was a letter in Victor Zimmerman's cramped handwriting. She read it aloud, her voice shaking. "Mrs. Willa Zimmerman, if you are reading this, then I am dead, and so are both of my sons. I will not insult your intelligence by pretending affection or regret. You were always smarter than Marcus gave you credit for, and I suspect you know more about the family's business than you ever let on. I am writing this because I find myself in the position of having no heirs, no one to carry on the Zimmerman name. My attorneys have informed me that legally, your son Samuel, as Marcus's child, is the rightful heir to the Zimmerman estate. I debated contesting his legitimacy, but the truth is, he is the only blood heir I have. Therefore, I am naming him as the sole beneficiary of my estate, with the provision that it be held in trust until he reaches the age of 21. You, as his mother and guardian, will have access to funds for his care and education, but you will not inherit directly. The estate includes the family house in Leavenworth, several business properties, and a considerable sum of money. My attorney has the details. I do this not out of love or respect, but because even in death, I will not see the Zimmerman legacy die with me. Do with this what you will. Victor Zimmerman. The room was silent when Willa finished reading. She stared at the letter, unable to process what it meant. Samuel, her sweet, innocent Samuel, was the heir to the Zimmerman fortune, the fortune built on cruelty and corruption and blood. "There is more," Talbot said quietly. "The estate is currently valued at approximately $50,000, not including properties. It is a substantial inheritance. As Samuel's mother, you would be appointed as the trustee of the estate until he comes of age. $50,000. It was an unimaginable sum, more money than Willa had ever dreamed of possessing. It would change everything. They could expand the ranch, hire help, send the children to the finest schools. They would never have to worry about money again. "I do not want it," Willa said flatly. "That money is stained with the blood of everyone Victor Zimmerman destroyed. I will not touch it." "Willa," Thomas said gently, "this is Samuel's inheritance. You do not have to decide right now." "There is nothing to decide. I will not take anything from that family. We have built a good life here without their money, and we will continue to do so." Talbot shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Brennan, I understand your feelings, but you should know that if you refuse the inheritance, it will likely be tied up in legal challenges for years. There are distant cousins who would contest the will, and Samuel's claim would be much harder to uphold if you do not act on it now. "Let them contest it," Willa said. "I do not care." "But Samuel might care," Thomas said quietly. "When he is grown, he might want the resources that inheritance could provide. We do not have to use the money now, but we could accept it and hold it in trust. Let Samuel decide what to do with it when he is old enough to understand." Willa looked at her husband, torn. She hated the idea of taking anything from the Zimmermans, but she could see the logic in what Thomas was saying. This was not about her pride or her anger. This was about Samuel's future. "All right," she said finally. "We will accept it, but the money stays in trust. We do not touch it unless absolutely necessary, and when Samuel is old enough, we tell him everything. We tell him what kind of man his grandfather was, what kind of family he came from. We let him decide whether he wants to keep it or give it away." "That is more than fair," Talbot said, clearly relieved. "I will draw up the necessary papers. You will need to sign some documents and we will need to establish the trust officially. I can handle all of that." Over the next few weeks, Willa and Thomas made several trips into Leavenworth to meet with Talbot and sign the necessary paperwork. It was strange being back in the town where she had been trapped for so long, but she was not the same terrified girl who had run into the night. She was Willa Brennan now, a wife and mother, and she walked through those streets with her head held high. The Zimmerman house had been closed up, the servants dismissed. Willa visited it once, walking through the rooms that had been her prison, and felt nothing but relief that she would never have to return. She instructed Talbot to sell the house and the business properties, to liquidate everything and place the proceeds into Samuel's trust. She wanted no physical ties to that place, no reminders. As winter approached again, life settled back into its comfortable routine. The money sat in trust, untouched, a safety net they hoped never to need. Willa was pregnant again. A surprise but a welcome one, and this time Thomas was even more protective, if that was possible. Samuel was 4 now, a bright, curious child who loved the ranch and the animals and helping his father with the chores. James was walking and talking, a bundle of energy who kept Willa constantly on her toes. Their 3rd child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in April of 1883, an easy delivery that took less than 6 hours. She was tiny and perfect, with a cap of dark hair and her father's eyes. Thomas wept when he held her for the first time, and Willa thought her heart might burst with love for this man who had given her so much. Life continued its gentle rhythm. The ranch prospered, not because of the Zimmerman money, which remained untouched, but because of hard work and dedication. Thomas expanded the herd, built a new barn, and hired 2 permanent ranch hands. Willa kept the house, tended the garden, and raised the children. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Samuel grew into a thoughtful, kind-hearted boy who loved books and animals in equal measure. When he was 8, Willa and Thomas sat him down and told him the truth about his birth father, about the Zimmerman family, about the inheritance that waited for him. They showed him the letter from Victor Zimmerman and explained carefully what it meant. Samuel listened solemnly, his young face serious. When they were done, he asked, "Do I have to be a Zimmerman?" "No," Willa said firmly. "You are a Brennan. You will always be a Brennan. The inheritance is yours by law, but you do not have to claim it. When you are old enough, you can decide what to do with it." "I do not want to be anything like them," Samuel said quietly. "I want to be like Pa. He is a good man." Thomas pulled his son into a hug, his eyes wet. "You are already a good man," he said, "and you will be an even better one. The choices they made do not have to define you." As the years passed, the children grew and flourished. Samuel turned out to have a gift for working with horses, and talked about someday breeding and training them professionally. James was more interested in books and learning, and Thomas and Willa scraped together the money to send him to a good school in town. Rose was the wild one, always climbing trees, catching frogs, and declaring that she was going to be a rancher like her father when she grew up. In 1889, when Willa was 30 years old, she gave birth to their fourth and final child, another son they named William. He was a peaceful baby, content to watch the world go by with solemn eyes, and he completed their family in a way Willa had not known they needed. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the children playing in the yard, Thomas took Willa's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Giving up the wealth you could have had, the easier life?" Willa looked at him, at the lines the sun had carved into his face, at the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, and she smiled. "Not for a single moment," she said. "This is the life I wanted. This is everything." "I love you," Thomas said, as he had said 1,000 times before. "I loved you from the moment I saw you in that barn, scared and desperate and so damn brave. And I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," Willa said, leaning against him. "You saved me, Thomas. You gave me a reason to hope when I thought hope was gone forever. You gave me a family, a home, a life worth living." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the Kansas sky in shades of gold and crimson. The children's laughter drifted on the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. It was an ordinary moment, but it was perfect in its simplicity. When Samuel turned 21 in 1900, he made his decision about the inheritance. He donated half of it to establish a home for women and children fleeing dangerous situations, naming it in honor of his mother. The other half he used to expand the ranch, buying the surrounding properties, and building it into one of the most successful operations in Kansas. He married a girl from town, a schoolteacher named Ellen, and they gave Thomas and Willa 6 grandchildren. James became a lawyer, dedicated to helping those who could not afford representation, and he used some of the inheritance Samuel had shared with him to open a practice that served the poor. He married late, to a widow with 2 children, and they were blissfully happy. Rose, true to her childhood declaration, became a rancher, taking over a portion of the expanded operation and running it with an iron fist and a heart of gold. She never married, declaring that she did not need a man to complete her, and she became a legend in the ranching community for her skill and business acumen. William, the baby, became a teacher, following in the footsteps of the dream his mother had once harbored for herself. He taught in the local school for 40 years, shaping young minds and inspiring generations of students. In their later years, Thomas and Willa would sit on the porch of the house they had shared for so many decades, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and reflect on the journey that had brought them there. The fear and pain of those early days had faded to distant memory, replaced by years of love and laughter and hard-won peace. When Thomas died in 1915 at the age of 58, Willa felt as though part of her soul had been torn away. They had been together for 36 years, had built a life and a family from nothing but courage and love. But even in her grief, she was grateful. Grateful for every moment they had shared, every laugh, every tear, every quiet evening sitting together as the sun set over the Kansas prairie. She lived another 10 years, long enough to see her great-grandchildren born, long enough to know that the legacy she and Thomas had built would endure. When she died peacefully in her sleep in 1925 at the age of 65, surrounded by family, her last thoughts were of that first night, when a scared girl had stumbled into a barn and a cowboy had looked at her with kind eyes and said, "They will never find you here." He had kept that promise and so much more. He had given her not just safety but love, Not just shelter, but a home. Not just survival, but a life rich with meaning and purpose and joy. The Zimmermans had tried to break her, to take everything from her, but they had failed. She had escaped, had built something beautiful from the ashes of her old life, and in doing so had won the greatest victory of all. The ranch continued for generations after, passed down through Samuel's line, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear, hope over despair. And though the details of those early days faded into family legend, the core truth remained, that sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms, sometimes in the shape of a young cowboy who offers shelter to a desperate woman and her child, and sometimes that shelter becomes a sanctuary, a home, and a love that lasts beyond a lifetime. The end.